So moving on then to the interview, which unfortunately is what everyone's going to face at an assessment centre, big company or small company. But what sort of interview will graduates most likely face, Kath? Is it going to be one-to-one, more of a panel interview?
Well, what it would seem is on a fairly typical standard assessment centre, someone might have an individual interview and a panel interview. More often than not, they trust a panel interview because there are more people assessing that candidate, but you may well have both. You might have a telephone interview early on in the stage, an individual interview and then a panel interview. Someone I've just spoken to recently has gone through quite a long process and felt like she'd had 3 separate interviews, and now she's got a final interview with a partner, which will, so to speak, seal the deal, will make the final decision. So interviews can be, at any stage in the process and of various kinds, really.
And what would you say is the best way that people can begin to prepare for the interviews to make sure that they're going to give their best?
Well, it's the same with everything, and it's boring to say it, but research shows whether you're in the interview or not, whether it's the presentation or the group exercises, you're researching into that organisation and what they're about and trying to understand that they have something precious, which is their company or organisation, and they want to give it into the hands of someone who respects it and really wants to work there. Now, the fact of the matter is most graduates are applying for lots of different companies, and yet they've still got to act as if that company, when they're there that day, is the focus of their attention. So the research really, really shows. And as I mentioned before, it isn't just the standard research. You've got to see this like each company or organisation, like a project in its own right, and try and find out way more than a surface search would give you. So that's one big part of it. But the other part is, as I mentioned before, you can second guess the questions they will ask. You can second guess the questions because they tell you about the competencies they're looking for, the skills they're looking for. That's normally very easily available. And if you were interviewing yourself for that job, if you thought of it that way, what questions would you need to ask to decide whether you had the competencies? If you think about it in that way, you should be able to second guess what questions will come up.
That's a really good point. And for every company that you apply to, especially the larger ones, on their website, they've got, these are our 7 core values, or, these are the, they even explicitly say, these are the competencies that we're looking for, whether it's, teamwork, critical thinking, or whatever it might be. So that if they've got 7 core values, you're probably going to get at least one question on each of those values.
Exactly. So it's not as mysterious as it seems. I mean, there often are the odd, I've talked about quirky questions, the surprise questions, but 90% of the questions you're going to be asked in an interview, you can prepare for. You can think, what would I say in answer to that? What example will I give for that? And so you have the chance to prepare, research the company, know what they're looking for, and actually not feed them back parrot-like answers, feed them back genuinely convincing examples of the thing they say they're looking for.
Yep, and that's a really good point. And even if you are interviewing for 10 different companies and this is your 10th interview of the week, you've got to make sure that you're delivering each answer fresh, as if it's the first time you've ever told it, just to make sure it's interesting for the person listening.
That's why I do recommend having quite a large bank of examples that you can sort of select for different organisations. And so you might have 4 examples of communication skills, 4 examples of dealing with a difficult situation. It's useful to have a large bank of examples. Most of us, if we really think about it, can think of times when we've had to negotiate, times when we've had to lead other people, times when we've had to collaborate. There ought to be plenty of examples that you could have, and it's really worth having these examples on some sort of spreadsheet as memory joggers that you can look and think, I'm going to use those 3 when they ask me about that, so that you've got some, as you say, fresh examples, and that you're not overusing one particular example and sounding a bit tired when you sort of pull out this example that you've used several times before.
No, that's a really good point. And you describe in the book about the chunk approach to interviews. Could you describe what this is?
In terms of questions, what I find with people is they don't know how much to say. And sometimes they say just one sentence answers, and sometimes they ramble and it's way, way too long. And so what's helped when I've done interview coaching with people is to say whatever question they ask, particularly the general questions, think about what 3 things can I say, or 3 or 4 things can I say. So if they say, why do you want to work here? 3 or 4 reasons. If they say, what can you offer us? 3 or 4 key skills or abilities you've got. And I say, prepare in your mind these 3 or 4 chunks, and make sure that the final chunk, before you say it, that you say something like, and finally, or lastly, so that they know you're coming to an end and you know you're coming to an end. And that sort of gives it a bit of structure. And it actually, when people practice it, when they try and do it, they go, well, that was really easy. I can do that. And it's not about learning what you want to say off by heart. It's just thinking, when they ask me, why do you want to work here? I'm going to say this point, and this point. And you don't have to say it the same way each time, but the content would be the same. So it just gives you a little bit of, as you say, freshness, but you know in your mind that's what I'm going to say. Those are the key points I want to make for that. So the chunking it just makes it easier for anyone to remember and deliver it in a compelling sort of way.
And another tool which I saw in the book, which I'd not come across before, was the Swerve acronym.
Yeah.
Again, could you fill us in on what this is?
Well, I made this up, and I made it entirely up because I had come across quite a few people who'd had these, and it's all over the place. You can read about it. These very strange questions that are seemingly unanswerable, and I just thought it would be helpful to have something that could help you remember how to deal with it. So I made this word up partly because you are trying to swerve away from taking the whole weird, wacky question over seriously, because the question itself won't have an answer. So if they ask you how many ice cubes would fill a London bus, nobody's ever done that probably, and there is no exact answer. But what they want to know is how you would work that out. So Swerve is about just finding a way to answer that question. So in the situation, the S is for the situation or scenario. You literally rephrase the scenario or situation they've given to you, whatever that is. And then you say what you see as the problem. So if it is the how many ice cubes in a London bus, the problem is, at one level, do you mean when they're still frozen or when they're starting to melt? You could start sort of talking about what you see the problem is. The problem is how many crevices there are on a London bus or whatever. You start talking about the problem. And then you start to explain your thinking. Well, I'm thinking this way. This is what I'm thinking, how I'd go about it. And this is the reasons I'd go about it in this way. And that's the R. So we've got the S, the situation, the W, what, define the problem, E, explain your thinking, R, your reasons for your thinking, and then sort of value your suggestions. So whatever you've said, the way you're going to go about measuring this or deciding this, how you value it. You might say something like, I think that's a reasonable way to go about this. And then you say, so finally my decision would be this. I'd work on this number, or I'd decide this. So Swerve is just a mnemonic, which some people might find helpful. But the most important thing to me is to say there isn't an exact answer to this. I've got to show my thinking how I'd go about it. So a very famous one, which has been overused, which was a silly question, which was, and most people have heard of now, is a Jaffa cake a biscuit or a cake? And most people would go into all sorts of complicated things about the ingredients and things like this. One graduate I spoke to just said, It's about which aisle it's on in the supermarket. If it's on the cake aisle, it's the cake. If it's on the biscuit. Now, he didn't come up at that just off the top of his head. He did some thinking. He showed his thinking. He was thinking, well, you know, what do we know about Jaffa cakes? And he was actually talking through his thinking, explaining his reasons, and then coming out with his final decision. Now, that wasn't the right decision. It's just a decision, and that's what these weird questions are about, showing your decision making, showing your thinking on your feet again, showing how you respond to something that's a bit wacky.
Excellent. The Swerve methodology, you heard it here first. Kath, that's one for you to get trademarked.
Worth reading the book for the proper explanation, perhaps.
No, definitely. And I know that I can remember one job I applied for, the question I got, which completely threw me at the time, was how much money does the average London taxi driver make? And yeah, I wish I'd had that mnemonic to help me with my thinking.
Good.
So thinking then at the end of the interview, what are some great questions that applicants can ask the interviewer when they get the inevitable question of, do you have any questions you'd like to ask me?
Well, it's interesting because I've sat on interview panels, and I sat on an interview panel a few years ago, and one of the applicants asked, when they were asked to ask any questions, why do you like working here? And one of the people on the panel that I was with looked quite thrown by this question. It was actually quite an awkward moment. But generally, I do think it's worth saying, what is it about this company that you like? How long have you been with this company, and what do you like about working with this company? I think that's quite a good question to ask. But there aren't any. I don't want anyone to think, oh, there's just this one question you can ask. I would encourage you to be curious. So there's a certain amount of information you can find in your research, but there might be something that you just couldn't find out that you were curious about. You'd heard a whisper about something, and you want to ask that curious question. A good curious question, which shows you're interested in that company, fascinated by that company even, is going to help you have a good, strong finish to the interview. Those are the kind of things there are obvious ones. They're kind of almost cliche ones, like, what kind of development will I be offered in this company, things like that. But I'd actually ask a curious question, that has come out of a unique curious question. So if I tell you a question now and everybody goes and asks that question, then it's not going to be unique anymore. Find a unique question that you can ask that shows your interest in that company, ideally.
Just don't ask how much money you're going to get paid or how many followers you get.
Yeah, well, it's funny because some people would say, oh, never ask that question because it makes you look like money's your goal. But it may well be that for certain job roles, they would think you were foolish not to ask that question. A high financial role, they might think, why the hell hasn't he asked what the salary is? So it's always a judgment call.